For me, it was the opportunities of what partners can do at a bigger scale. Your unfair advantages changes through time. And that's one of the things that I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that until later when I began making more money as a realtor and I needed to offset the taxes that I was paying, like all of that income. Before, I was the boots on the ground. And then later, in me getting the knowledge and making more income and building relationships, which in real estate is super important, I began to be on the other side. I began
Diego, welcome to the show today.
Michael, thank you for having me here. Very excited.
I listened to your a podcast from Brendan's Turner podcast, and I just really just enthralled with your story of overcoming obstacles and challenges. And let's just give us maybe a shorter version of that 90-minute interview of kind of how you got to this point, and then I want to kind of drill deep on some of those aspects.
Yeah. So, long story short, it so where I am now, and then I'll take you back really quick, right? But where I am now, up until about 2 weeks ago, I had over 65 units, over 65 doors as a real estate investor, age 33. And I am actively as a realtor. I got financial independence at 26, millionaire by 29, multimillionaire by 30. And even though all that sounds great, one of the things that I share in Brandon Turner's podcast is that I am undocumented. I am a dreamer and a DACA recipient, which means that I don't have a green card. I am not a citizen. But what I do have is big goals and big aspirations and a strong work ethic, right? So, and I couldn't work or drive till 22. So everything that I said of me buying my first house at 23 and then financial independence at 26, it all came as soon as I was able to legally work and drive in the US with the DACA program. And that basically allowed me to get connected with the right people. I started to study real estate. I joined mastermind groups, met mentors, and that's how I started. But really quick, I came from Lima, Peru when I was 9 years old. We came here with a tourist visa from Peru, and I had no idea what it really meant to be undocumented until I turned 15 years old. When I was gonna get my driver's license, like all my friends, go to the DMV, and they said, Diego, you do not qualify. You're missing documents. And when I turned to my mom, she's like, you don't have those documents. So that's when I knew that I was gonna be facing a few obstacles as I became more of a teenager and into adult. At age 18, found that I couldn't qualify for student loans or financial aid. And at age 19, found out I couldn't legally work here in the United States. Even though I had the opportunities, I graduated 30 of my high school class, graduated top 1% of Florida State University. So I became resourceful. And that's one of my skills. My unfair advantage is resourcefulness, I would say, because I always try to figure out a way. And I found out that I could create my own company. So I began working as an IT contractor. Instead of companies paying Diego, they would pay my company. And that's how I was able to pay for college. And it wasn't until the Obama administration created the DACA program, that's where I was finally able to work and drive, became an adult officially too at age like 21, 22, whatever you want to call it, and got that opportunity. Yeah. So DACA is called Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and it's basically a permit that I have to renew every 2 years. That gives me a driver's license, a work permit, and a social security number so that I can stay here in the United States. We go through a background check and everything. And I just can't leave the country, but I'm in a position where I can get deported because it's more for the dreamers, which were the kids that came here back before 2012 to be official, or before 2007, actually, before 2007. And then those kids are now becoming adults. They've gone through high school, college, and now they're here in this country. And and now we're like providing value to the community. And if we cannot work, if we cannot drive, that was what the Obama administration did. They gave us that permit while waiting for Congress to do something for the long path rather than just a short-term thing. So we're still waiting for Congress to act. Not to get political here, right? But Congress does take their sweet time a few times. So yeah.
So let me get this straight though. You're able to work and drive when you're like 22. Is that right?
Finally, yeah.
So finally, okay, fine. But then at 23, if I'm looking at my notes correctly, you did your first house.
Yeah, I bought my first property.
So all right. So not too many 23-year-olds buy a house. How did that come about?
Yeah. So funny enough, in high school, I'm sorry, in college, my best friend, Pascal Wagner, who I don't know if you know, Michael, he's also part of GoBundance. He throws me this book. We were in college, and it's the Rich Dad Poor Dad book. And in it, he says, dude, you have to read this book. It's amazing. I read it, and I'm like, holy crap, this book, it doesn't teach me how to do anything, but it changes the mindset, right? So then, funny enough, I remember I was walking to a class. I called my dad, and me calling my dad, I'm like, Dad, I just read this book. In it, it talks about instead of you buying a brand new car, you can get a condo for $20,000. That income from that condo pays for the car. And then once you pay off the car, you keep the condo, and it's making you passive income. That was the first time that I ever heard about passive income. And my dad's like, oh, that's cool. A week and a half later, my dad calls me and he's like, Diego, I just saw this condo. I just saw for sale for a condo for 20,000. Should I buy it? And I was like, I don't know. I just read this in a book. I'm like, maybe, sure. And so he ends up buying it. And what's crazy is that condo is now worth over $150,000. My dad bought, that was in 2011 in Florida, right after that, or 2010. So that was like right after the crash. But long story short, when I graduated college, I get a job because I was finally able to get a job. And I moved to Austin, Texas, where I was going to work as a software developer. So through that journey, though, I had read Rich Dad Poor Dad. I was reading different books, and I knew that I wanted to build wealth in real estate, even though I didn't know how. I didn't know what I wanted to do. But I remember reading Rich Dad Poor Dad, looking into Bigger Pockets. I found about that and found about house hacking. In the process of me wanting to house hack in Austin, Texas, I got so many no's from lenders saying, we don't know what DACA is. How can you have a social, but you don't have, like, you can't work, but are you going to get deported later? Like, what's going on? And I was like, I don't know. So after hearing like 12 no's, I decided to call my dad and be like, look, this is my big dream, but I don't know how I can do it. And my dad's like, well, there's this property here in Florida for 60,000. How much money do you have? But that time I had saved around 25,000. So my dad was like, okay, I have 25. My dad had 25. And I called my buddy Pascal, and I'm like, Pascal, can I borrow 10,000 from your dad? And he says yes. So we bought that property cash. That was in October 2020, 2013.
That's amazing.
That was my first property.
That's your first property. How did it do?
It did very well, to the point that fast forward to like, I think like 2019 or 2020, my dad is like, Diego, can I, the property has, like, you're going to inherit this property later. Can I keep the cash flow? I'll pay you, like, I'll double the money or whatever and walk away. And I was like, all right, sure. So he gave me $50,000. I double my investment, and now he has that property. And I think is worth like, oh man, maybe close to 200. Yeah. So that was like a few years ago. So that was my thing. And then later, I was finally able to buy a 4-bedroom home here in Austin when I was 24 years old. And I began house hacking by living for free. I rented out the other bedrooms, lived there. And then I started doing that again and again, and I partner up with people understanding. Well, I partner up with my buddy Pascal, because then I realized that as an investor, there's four unfair advantages that you can do as an investor especially when you partner with somebody. It's either money, time, your network, and knowledge. So in the beginning, I had no money, right? But my buddy Pascal did. And I was the boots on the ground, quote unquote, the knowledge on the market. And he had the money, right? And I was able to have the time too to manage the properties, be the boots on the ground, everything. So we started buying more homes here in Austin, where by that time I also got my realtor's license. And we started buying 4-bedroom homes, renting them by the room, and doubling the cash flow of all of those properties. And that gave me, as I was learning more and more, I just started to add more properties to the portfolio. And that was in the beginning.
Yeah, partnerships are amazing. Let's really talk about that because I had a similar experience. You know, I come from a single family house, world where I'm using hard money and flipping houses. You don't have any partners, right? I mean, you have the hard money guy who's not really a partner. And so partnerships when you get into real estate are absolutely key. I mean, Garrett is obviously on the show here and Drew's the other partner, but we have partners all the time. And the light bulb moment went off for me when I actually raised some money to fund a house flip. When I realized that I can raise that money, that, I realized that I can actually buy more than one house at one time. Like I could literally buy 5 at the time. All I need to do is raise more money. And I wonder if you had a similar aha moment somewhere in your journey, especially around raising capital or partnerships, or in other words, blowing your mind to the point where, you now realize something was possible where short time before you didn't think it was even possible.
Yeah, for me, it was the opportunities of what partners can do at a bigger scale by leveraging. Like once I realized that, my thing was that your unfair advantages changes through time. And that's one of the things that I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that until later when I began making more money as a realtor, and I needed to offset the taxes that I was paying, like all of that income. I began to, before I was the boots on the ground, and then later in me getting the knowledge and making more income and building relationships, which in real estate is super important, I began to be on the other side. I began to be like, hey, now I don't have the time to be the boots on the ground, but I have the money now. So then I began to partner up with people, leveraging their time, leveraging their expertise. And that's how I was able to get to the point that now I have nine Airbnbs, 9 doors Airbnbs in the Smoky Mountains. Then we bought a 16 unit in North Augusta. We bought a 16 unit there with 4 other partners. So we're a total of 5, myself and 3 other partners. We brought in the money. The other partners did too, but they brought up the deal, the know-how, the numbers, everything. And it gave us the opportunity to create a partnership. And we bought it in 2020, early 2022, and we just sold it and we doubled our money. So it was pretty good. Yes. That was my first deal and we were just getting started. So I know that by deal number 2, we were going to be structuring the deal in a different way. Just FYI. The first one, we were all even, right? We were all even, and one person will handle the numbers. Like Tiago, he is amazing at running numbers and everything, and he would handle a lot of the due diligence of the deal, and then he was going to be handling a lot of the numbers after the deal happened, and then somebody else was going to be handling the property management of it, like asset management, because he was the boots on the ground. And then the 3 other partners were there as needed, which that included me. But we basically, it's one of those things where we were all together in at a mastermind, right? We were all together at a house and they brought that deal. And they were like, look, we're going to be needing investors because it's a really good deal. We just don't have the money. And between the 2 or 3 of us that were there, that we had the money, we're like, hey, let's partner up and we'll just buy it. We'll go under contract this weekend. If the offer gets accepted, let's submit it. We got it. Let's do it. So we said yes, right? So at the end of the day, we divided it in a way of, we had the boots on the ground. They also did the asset management, and that guy also was the property management. He had a property management company. So again, unfair advantages, and they leveraged us to be like, hey, we can close in whatever time, we can put up the money for the down payment, our parts, without any hassle. So that's what we did. Fast forward to potential deal number 2, then we had the negotiations more of like, hey, if we bring the deal, do we get a little bit more equity? If we're going to be doing the asset management, do we get more equity and stuff like that? So we ended up having those types of conversations. I don't remember what the splits were, but we didn't buy anymore. Not because we didn't want to do it like that. It just happened that we didn't find more deals that where the numbers worked at that time.
So what you're saying is your unfair advantage changes over time. But what I'm hearing you say, and this is very important for everybody watching, listening, is that partnerships are the key to getting to the next level, especially in real estate, right? And so what do you bring to the table? What do you have right now, right? In the early days, you had hustle, right? And you needed money or knowledge or something, okay? Now you have more knowledge, you have more money. So now you're looking for hustlers, people bringing you deals, people boots on the ground, that kind of stuff. So it's constantly shifting, but partnerships are still at the core of your real estate investing.
Exactly. And I think it's one of the best ways to scale, a part of raising private capital too, but which I haven't done as much, but for right now it has been more of the partnerships, creating value and understanding that we all have to complement each other. Because if I partner up with somebody that is just money and I have the money, then what are we going to do? We don't have the knowledge to go out there and find a deal, right? So
you mentioned that you did a partnership with someone from your mastermind. Now, I don't know, did you grow up with the idea of a mastermind? I find that most people have no idea what mastermind is. At what point did you become aware of this idea of a mastermind? And
yeah,
how did you go about that? And what role has that played in your career?
yeah, I believe so. Masterminds for me have been the life-changing, like, has been the key to my success, actually, to, if I'm being brutally honest. Um, I got first introduced about the power of the mastermind by reading the book Think and Grow Rich. That's where he talks about it, Napoleon Hill. And I had no idea until I listened to a podcast. They were talking about this is like April of 2014, I believe, right when I got my license to be a realtor. I listened to a podcast by a guy named Pat Hyben, and who happens to be one of the owners of GoBundance. And I reached out to him on Twitter, and fast forward 3 months later, I found myself in this room with 12 millionaires, where my net worth at that time was 25,000. I was 20. I had just turned 20. I turned 24 at that event. So me applying and everything, I was 23 years old. And so I show up to David Osborne's house, one of the other elders of GoBundance, and they're going around introducing themselves, what their net worth is, all of that stuff. And when they come to me, and this is guys that are worth 40, 50, like 10 million, 5 million. When they come to me, I'm like, my name is Diego, and my net worth is $25,000.
Now,
I'm
who
a
let you in?
self-developer. Exactly. I'm like, I just got my license. They laughed a little bit, and I was like, who the heck is this kid? And I was like, well, like, I'm here because of a Twitter DM that I sent a few months ago. And yeah, so that was about 10 years ago. And it's crazy what the power of the mastermind has done for me, because then they became my mentors, right? And when you're having mentors, I did everything that they told me to do, like everything. Like, Diego, go to Tony Robbins. I went to Tony Robbins. Diego, take the speech class, to the speech class. Read all these books. I read them. And every time that I would go to the next event, I will be at a different stage. And the first one was like, guys, how do I create leverage? Okay, read the E-Myth. You have to hire somebody. all right, the next time was like, how do I get more people in my team? And now I lead a real estate team where we sell around 100 million a year, and creating the right leverage, attracting the right people, all of that stuff. And then to the point that now I have my own mastermind group, right? But here's the key thing. By going to those events, I always ask different questions because I was in a different stage in my life. Then in 2020, 2021, I started asking, hey, what are you guys doing with all the equity that you guys have been building throughout these years? Because now I've been in abundance for seven years or 6 years, and I've seen them grow their equity and everything. What are you guys doing? And that's when they introduced me to like the whole thing of return on equity, right? Where it's like, hey, you can have a 10% cash on cash return, great. But years later, when those assets go up, you have to ask yourself, what are you doing with that quote unquote debt equity? Because you cannot, like, you can't eat on equity, you eat based on cash flow, right? So it's like, what do you have based on equity that then you can see the return? And then that's when I started getting more lines of credit, leveraging to buy more deals, and just looking in a different stage where now I'm looking at return on equity. And the other thing was cost segregation.
Talk about
Yeah.
cost segregation. Why was that important to you right now?
Yeah. So cost segregation, and this is one thing that we were talking about earlier, is like, you have to understand, at least in my eyes, I've gone from, like, I didn't just pick a niche and went all into one thing. I've graduated into various parts of being an investor, I would say, because I went from riding my bike, literally riding my bike and no money, to now making, in 2020 or 2021, I made over 500,000 as a realtor. And then I got to the point where, like, okay, what do I do with all this money? So that I, other than just invest it, right, invested wisely so that I don't pay as much in taxes from that perspective. So then I started looking at investments, not just based on cash flow, which was great, but also based on the bonus appreciation and the cost segregation, so that I can depreciate an asset as quickly as possible the first couple of years, rather than waiting for 27 and a half or whatever it is for on the commercial side, right? On the multifamily, I think it's like 33 years or something. So those things is what made the difference for me, because then for me it was more important at times getting a K1 that was negative 100,000 than me increasing my cash flow by 500 a month. Yeah.
That makes sense. And you're a real estate professional because you're a realtor broker, and so you can offset your earned income from the brokerage with passive losses, which is amazing that the tax code allows you to do that. That's really awesome.
Exactly.
Now, you said you graduated from one phase to another, and I find that a lot of people graduate from one phase to another, and some people spend less time in a phase and longer time in a phase. And I'm always fascinated by people who seem to skip phases entirely. Like Elon Musk came out of the womb like already 100 levels ahead of everybody else. Like, I don't know how is this possible? And so I'm wondering, now you have at least 10 years of real estate investing experience. And if you were to go back in time, maybe to 2014 or even before then, and not saying you have any regrets, but what would you have done differently? What would you have sat young Diego down and said, hey, Diego, you can do this thing for the next 10 years, or you can maybe do these things and get results faster? What would that be?
Yeah, I would have probably told myself to buy properties faster, or buy more properties, because there were times that, for example, we would say no because we really wanted to get this property for 180 or 190,000, and it was like 200,000, like 205,000, right? So like for 10,000, we wouldn't be buying properties that maybe then would have made sense. But looking back, when those properties are worth now like 350 to 400, I'm like, crap, like just trying to, but comes through experience and being in the city like Austin, where we saw it grow like crazy into like from 2014 to 2022, it grew like crazy. Then it came down around 15%, 20%, which is still significant. But I think that equity is something that I could have taken more advantage of if I just invested more, rather than being a little bit too cautious. Because in the beginning, my mindset didn't think big enough from that perspective.
So okay, that's interesting. So what could you have done differently back then? You talk about the mastermind, right? Imagine you were sitting next to David Osborne, you're hemming and hawing over $10,000 on a $200,000 house. What would he have said to you?
He would have said, I think he would have said, try to borrow the money if that is an issue. I just didn't think big enough from that perspective of being like, oh my gosh, like, let me go and invest into these deals. Where now it would have been like, hey, try to raise some money on your own, and be able to grow the portfolio, knowing, or at least trusting, how the Austin market was going to be.
Well, that's hindsight though, right? Imagine you were getting started in 2004, 2005, right? When 3 years later, the market completely collapsed and people lost their shirts in real estate, right? So, I mean, you still have to underwrite your deals and you have to stick to them. But what I'm hearing you say is maybe you were too conservative in general. You were looking for more of a home run, a sure thing. When in real estate, I don't know, of all my deals I've done, maybe there was one sure thing. Like all the other ones were like all in the gray area, right? And so being too conservative will keep you out of trouble, but it also keeps you from doing a single deal. So
exactly.
And how do you reconcile that now? Have you evolved or changed your thinking around risk in that sense? If so, how?
Yeah, for me, it got to be more on the perspective of, I would say, looking at deals, right? But more on the cash flow that it could bring than just the like then following those like 1% rules or anything, or because like that's why the reasons why we didn't buy more and more homes here in Austin was because we were trying to follow too much of those like 1% rules and this or that, rather than analyzing the market, the local market as a whole. Because I remember I bought a property here in Austin back in 2014, and it was 135,000, and it rented for 1350, which is literally the 1% rule. And I believe that I was the last person that ever found that MLS, because it was on the MLS, because after that, the Austin market took off. So here's the one thing that I would say, looking back, for me at least, is don't let like rules that are set for like the national thing, like you have to know your market at a deep level. Because then if you're in a market where the rents are 300 and the property like now there's 2% rule or whatever, right? So you want to make sure that your local market, you're following the rules of the local market.
Yeah, I would say that that's very accurate. I think that you spend most of your time, it seems like, in residential versus commercial. And I don't think residential in general has seen a big swing downwards yet, at least in this cycle. And that I would argue on the commercial side, like the bigger apartment deals, that there's definitely a balance. You don't want to go too far in one direction. You know, it's easy to say, hey, I wish I would have plowed more money in the real estate market when things are going up, and I would have made all this extra money. But I am looking at it now after what just happened and what we're in the middle of right now in the bigger apartment complexes, that, man, I wish maybe I would have tightened the underwriting or done something differently and been even more conservative. So it really is based on the market cycles, right? And then knowing the submarket, absolutely, you have to know block by block where you're sitting, and what property values are going for here and there. But a lot of it's luck.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I mean, you're in an industry that is largely dictated by its cyclical nature, and your timing is what matters the most at the end of it. And so It's awesome to hear that you've timed a lot of these deals well, and you've done some great things on that side. Um, and man, your story is so inspiring. So,
Thank you.
very cool.
And
Thank
what,
you.
Diego, what's next for you, man? Because I just, you've come a long way in a short period of time, and your mind's constantly expanding. Like,
Mhm.
what's kind of your vision for the future?
Yeah, for me, one of the big things that I will get to is definitely going to be in raising private capital, especially now too that I have my mastermind, and we have around 100, we have like, yeah, like 80 investors, but we're more on the residential side. But what's interesting is that I'm a big believer in like building your credibility, like doing some things in the beginning so that so that you don't make mistakes based on other people's money. If I want to make mistakes, I want to do it based on my money, so that then I can go back and be like, hey, this is what I learned, this is what I did, this is how I was successful. I'm gonna be starting to raise money, follow me and see my journey. But now I get to build that trust with them. So in the future, I will be raising some money, especially as I partner up with other people within my mastermind group or within other markets. I believe that that's going to be important. Yeah. One thing that I do want to say based on what Garrett said earlier, because it was something that I heard, I believe his name was Scott Donnell or Scott something, Scott Garrett. He was Justin Lewis House podcast. He does he does financial literacy for kids or for young families, and he said in that podcast, look, as an investor, is like you should give yourself grace that 49% is based on you and 51% it's on the market, right? But you should also understand that like if you make mistakes and everything, right, it's like give grace that it like is the market has a big commitment, but also don't let all of those big things that happen when the market is up, that your ego goes up too, right? Because everybody, and that's what happened, I believe, a lot in between 2020 and into 2020, early 2022, where everybody was raising money, everybody was buying all this multifamily, and now they're in big mistakes, right? Because they didn't underwrite the deals with the right interest rates and all of that stuff. And now that the bridge loans are over, like, because I've done some syndications that some did very well, others not so well. And now I would ask questions different, or I would ask different questions in the beginning if I'm investing into a syndication, that I know if I would have asked it, I would not have invested into into that deal.
You bring up the good point around dealing with emotions and investing, greed and fear. Those are the two levels, and we've seen everything. I mean, I remember 2007 and 8, there was a lot of greed leading up to that.
Mhm.
If you're both your neighbors jump into rental property, you know something's going on, right? People are like, I bought this thing and 30 days later I sold it for $20,000 more. I'm like, wow, really? That's amazing, right? And so there was this greed, and then of course the market crash, and then there was fear, and no one touched real estate with a 10-foot pole, and you just get this cycle. And of course, the smart investors are cool during the times of greed,
Mhm.
and they are looking for opportunities when there's fear. And it's this environment, depending on the type of asset class you're looking at.
Mhm.
Multifamily, and you could argue, is a little bit in that state right now where there's a lot of fear. And so this is where Garrett and I or Drew are looking for opportunity right now, because we've seen this before. The challenge is convincing your investors that now is the time to buy when there's blood in the streets. And so that is always the challenge in taking advantage of opportunity. So it is interesting times. The ups and downs makes it really interesting to me. In my mind, it's I can't time the market, right? I just want to be in the game. I want to get in
Mhm.
the best way. I know you maybe you beat yourself up over your underwriting a little bit, but I don't know. And Garrett beat yourself up a little for underwriting. I don't know. You make the best decisions with what you're given at the time. Yes, control your greed and fear. I get all that, but you just try to get in at the best way you can, And I have found that over time, real estate fixes itself. It may not go right to plan, but the ship rights itself and becomes profitable. I've had multiple deals, buy and hold deals that didn't go right. My first apartment building deal was awful. And, took me 6 years to get out of it and then doubled my money because I had 6 years to get out of it. My thing is got to get in the game because there's no better way to build wealth, cash flow, and get tax benefits than real estate. Garrett.
Think about like there's a cycle. The majority of the cycle is going up, right? So most of the time you're in real estate, you're in an advantageous situation, but you still have to protect the downside. So there's going to be that, couple years where things are going the other direction and you don't know when it's going to be, right? So understanding how you're going to navigate that when it gets to that point, because no one can really time the market perfectly. That's the, $1 million question there is that. And so figuring out what that is for you as a real estate investor in general, I think is very important. And with the different cycles comes the experience and the knowledge. And every time you go through a new cycle, it looks totally different than the last on a down cycle. But there's this feeling that you get of just like, oh, I see that this frenzy that can't be here for that much longer. And so there's adjustments you can make. You may not be perfect all the time and it may not work out every time, but that's what you typically see with people that go through multiple cycles.
So it's been interesting jamming with you, Diego. You mentioned a mastermind. Tell us where people can connect with you and find a little bit more of what you got going on.
Yeah, for sure. For anybody that wants to learn more about what I have going on, they can follow me on Instagram at Real Diego Corzo, or they can go to the website thefiinvestors.com. That's FI investors.com, and it stands for Financial Independent Investors.
That's awesome. So follow Diego. He's doing a lot of really cool stuff, and you really have a heart for young people because, well, you are one. And so definitely follow and see what you're doing and watch you raise capital. And it's going to be amazing what you do. So, man, really enjoyed hanging out with you, Diego. Thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Garrett. Have a good day.